a hot day. It is Wednesday, July 28th, 2021. And it's good to see everybody. Before we start the Metropolitan Council meeting, I want to acknowledge that we are still in a COVID-19 pandemic, and hopefully it's going to be better, but now we're not sure. We are still holding a virtual meetings, and we're doing that because we deem it to be safer under Minnesota statutes section 13D.021. And regrettably, we can't have public comment during these kind of virtual meetings, but we encourage anybody listening or watching who would like to give a comment, please email us at public.info@metc.state.mn.us, and we will respond to your comments in a timely manner. In order to establish a quorum, I'm going to call on either Liz or Bridget, I see Bridget is here, I'm not sure about Liz, to call the roll. I know Liz has some power issues. So Bridget, maybe you...
Liz told me she is on. I see her phone number.
Oh, okay.
Might be muted.
Might be muted.
I am ready if we need it.
Can you hear me?
We can. There you are. Welcome.
Okay.
Yes. Can you do that? Call the roll?
Yes. Yes. Atlas Ingebretson. Barber. Chambliss.
Here.
Cummings. Ferguson.
Here.
Fredson.
Here.
Gonzalez. Johnson.
Here.
Lee.
Here.
Lindstrom.
Here.
Musse.
Here.
Sterner.
Here.
Vento.
Here.
Wolf.
Here.
Zurin. Zurin. And
I'm here, and I see Councilmember Zarin waving with a little audio coming through here. And Councilmember Barber, I believe, has just joined us.
Gonzalez is here too.
And Councilmember Gonzalez, welcome.
Okay.
All right, we have a quorum. And now the approval of the minutes, and unless anybody has an objection or an amendment or a change or questions, I will deem it approved. And not
Mr. Chair, you're referring to the agenda, not the minutes, correct?
I did I say minutes? Well, there's my slip. Thank you. This is why we have great council members. Keep me on track. If we don't hear any objection to the agenda, then we will go on to the minutes. And hearing nothing, that there are minutes that were sent out ahead from our meeting on July 14th.
Wolf moves the minutes.
Is there a second?
Turner seconds.
Lindstrom.
Thank you. Any comments, discussion? All right, hearing none. Liz, call the roll.
Atlas Ingebretson. Barber.
Aye.
Chambliss.
Aye.
Ferguson.
Aye.
Fredson.
Aye.
Gonzalez.
Here.
Johnson.
Aye.
Lee,
Aye.
Lindstrom,
Aye.
Mhm.
Musse,
Aye.
Sterner,
Aye.
Bento,
Aye.
Wolf,
Aye.
Zurin,
Aye. Did you hear me okay?
Got it.
Aye.
and Chair Zelli.
Aye. All right, that motion carried. On to the consent agenda. Is there a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda?
Bento moves approval. Johnson seconds.
Thank you. Thank you. Any discussion? All right, hearing none. Liz, please call the roll.
Atlas Ingebretson, Barber,
Aye.
Chambliss,
Aye.
Ferguson,
Aye.
Fredson,
Aye.
Gonzalez,
Aye.
Johnson,
Aye.
Lee,
Aye.
Lindstrom,
Aye.
Musse,
Aye.
Sterner,
Aye.
Bento,
Aye.
Wolf,
Aye.
Zurin, Zurin,
Zarin is an
Chair Zelli.
aye.
Thank you. And Chair Zelli.
Aye. All right, that motion carried. Now we're on to the standing committees, and community development reports are on the consent agenda. But next up is the Environment Committee. Councilmember Lindstrom.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Before us today, we're considering the MCES wastewater rates and charges. This is business item 2021-176. And staff presented the preliminary 2022 budget and rates to the Environment Committee back in May. We then had 2 customer webinars in May and June where we had a record number of our customers attend these webinars. 126 folks attended. And the proposed revenue increase for the regional wastewater charge in 2022 is a 4% increase over 2021. Of course, it'll vary from city to city depending on their flow. This rate increase is being driven by increases that we're seeing in utilities, increases in labor, increases in chemical costs, as well as a decent sized information service project as well. Details are provided in the business item, of course. The increase and the other rate changes comply with our council policies and should enable environmental services to meet our wastewater regulatory requirements, implement the infrastructure rehabilitation and repair needs, and provide wastewater capacity for our region's growth. So in addition, these proposed charges and rates are based on our cost of service methodology per our council policy. These wastewater rates need to be set well in advance because our city customers set their own budgets and their own rates in the months ahead. Therefore, Mr. Chair and members of the council, I move that the Met Council adopt the wastewater rates and charges to be effective January 1st, 2022, as outlined on page 1 of the business item.
Thank you, Peter. Is there a second?
Wolf seconds.
Thank you. Any discussion? All right, Liz, please call the roll.
Barber,
Aye.
Chambliss,
Aye.
Ferguson, Ferguson,
Aye.
Fredson,
Aye.
Gonzalez,
Aye.
Johnson,
Aye.
Lee,
Aye.
Lindstrom,
Aye.
Musse,
Aye.
Sterner,
Aye.
Bento,
Aye. Sorry.
Wolf,
Aye.
Zurin,
Zero is aye.
and Chair Zelli.
Aye, and I believe Councilmember Atlas Ingebrigtsen is in the room, Zoom room, and votes aye.
Okay, thank you.
All right, the motion is carried, and we are on to the Management Committee. Councilmember Ferguson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We have one business item on the agenda that is business item 2021-149, a labor agreement with the International Association of Machinists and Aerospace Workers, District Lodge number 77. The International Association of Machinists and Aerospace Workers District Lodge number 77 contract expired on December 31st, 2020. The machinists represent 52 employees in environmental services. The parties reached a tentative agreement on June 7th, 2021. And following a recommendation from the International Association of Machinists and Aerospace Workers, District Lodge number 77, Executive Board, the membership ratified the agreement on June 22nd, 2021. The highlights of the agreement include a 3-year contract, 2% general wage increase in years 1 and 2, and 2.5% general increase in year 3 of the contract for all active employees. The wages and benefits negotiated in the agreement are consistent with the agreements in place with Council's other labor unions. The cost of the labor agreement was reviewed by Finance and was negotiated within the economic parameters established by the Council. This item was reviewed and approved by the Management Committee on July 14th, 2021. It was motioned by Barber, seconded by Lulgren, and approved unanimously. Mr. Chair, the Management Committee, Mr. I move to approve and to authorize the Regional Administrator to enter into a labor agreement with the International Association of Machinists and Aerospace Workers District Lodge number 77, effective January 1st, 2021 through December 31st, 2023.
Great, thank you, Chris. Is there a second?
Johnson seconds.
Thank you. Any discussion, questions? All right, hearing none. Liz, please call the roll.
Atlas Ingebrigtsen,
Aye.
Barber,
Aye.
Chambliss,
Aye.
Ferguson,
Aye.
Fredson.
Aye.
Gonzalez,
Aye.
Johnson,
Aye.
Lee,
Aye.
Lindstrom,
Aye.
Musse,
Aye.
Sterner,
Aye.
Bento,
Aye.
Wolf,
Aye.
Zurin,
Aye.
and Chair Zelli.
Aye, that motion carries. Transportation has reports on the consent agenda. which takes us to a joint report of Environment and Community Development Committees. And I believe Councilmember Bento, are you taking this?
Yes, I am, Mr. Chair. Thank you. The following two business items are for comprehensive plans for communities connected to the regional wastewater system. Both items were reviewed by the Community Development Committee and the Environment Committee. In both cases, council staff have found the 2040 plans to conform to regional system plans. They are consistent with council policies, and they are compatible with the plans of adjacent and affected jurisdictions. The first is business item 2021-167 JT Birchwood Village 2040 Comprehensive Plan. The first business, this is to authorize the 2040 Comprehensive Plan for Birchwood Village and to approve their comprehensive sewer plan. Mr. Chair, I move that the Metropolitan Council adopt the attached advisory comments and review record and take the following actions. That we recommend on behalf of the Community Development Committee, which is recommending that we authorize the city of Birchwood to place its 2040 comprehensive plan into effect, advise the city to implement the advisory comments in the review record for transportation and wastewater, and from the Environment Committee, approve the city of Birchwood Village's comprehensive sewer plan.
Thank you, Sue. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? All right, Liz, please call the roll.
Atlas Ingebretson,
Aye.
Barber,
Aye.
Chambliss,
Aye.
Ferguson,
Aye.
Fredson.
Aye.
Gonzalez,
Aye.
Johnson,
Aye.
Lee,
Aye.
Lindstrom,
Aye.
Musset,
Aye.
Sterner,
Aye.
Bento,
Aye.
Wolf,
Aye.
Zurin,
Aye.
and Chair Zelli.
Aye. That motion carried. Councilmember Vento.
The second item, Mr. Chairman, is business item 2021-168 to authorize the 24 comprehensive plan for Champlin and to approve their comprehensive sewer plan. Mr. Chair, I move that the Metropolitan Council adopt the attached advisory comments and review record and take the following actions. Recommendations of the Community Development Committee include authorize the City of Champlin to place its 2040 comprehensive plan into effect, revise the city's forecasts upward and downward as shown in Table 1 of the attached review record, revise the city's affordable housing need allocation for 2021-2030 to 201 units, and advise the city that within 60 days after receiving the DNR approval, the city must adopt the MRCCA plan and submit a copy of the final adopted plan and evidence of adoption to the DNR, the council, and the National Park Service within 10 days after the adoption. And finally, a recommendation of the Environment Committee to approve the City of Champlin's comprehensive sewer plan.
Great. Thank you, Sue. Is there a second?
Second by Chambliss.
Any discussion? Questions? All right, Liz, please call the roll.
Atlas Ingebretson,
Aye.
Barber,
Aye.
Chambliss,
Aye.
Ferguson,
Aye.
Fredson,
Aye.
Gonzalez,
Aye.
Johnson,
Aye.
Lee,
Aye.
Lindstrom,
Aye.
Musset,
Aye.
Sterner, Sterner, Bento,
Aye.
Wolf,
Aye.
Zurin,
There's an eye. Look at his thumb up there.
and Chair Zelli.
Aye. All right, that motion is carried. So,
Chair, I just want to make sure folks saw that Councilmember Sterner had his thumbs up.
so the record shows that was a aye vote from Councilmember Sterner. Thank you.
Thank you very
Chris.
much.
There it is. Okay, good. Which takes us to other business. We have two items, business item 2021-188 and 2021-189. And these are my recommendations for appointments to the Land Use Advisory Committee and the Livable Communities Advisory Committee. And I know we say this, I say this every time we come with advisory committee appointments, but really these members' input in this process we have at council is really critical to our work. And you know, these represent really important partners who give their time and their expertise and their perspective, and it really makes what we do not just easier, but really guided and in a good way, and really kind of help shape the policy that guides the region. So this is really important that we kind of both take seriously these appointments, but also that we kind of know that appointing them and asking them for their time is not a small deal. First, business item 2021-188 is the appointment of Mayor Bill Drosty of Rosemont to the vacancy of District 15 on the Land Use Advisory Committee. Now, his service to the community includes a number of things, including positions on the Minnesota Valley Transit Authority Board of Directors, the Minnesota Statewide Emergency Communications Board, Regional Council of Mayors, Family Housing Fund Board. He also serves on the National League of Cities Transportation Infrastructure and Services Committee. This possibly proves the rule that if you want to get something done, find a really busy guy. So we've done that. Business item 2021-189 has 9 appointments to the Livable Communities Advisory Committee. And just to remind everyone, this is the technical review group with broad expertise, and it reviews the complex development and redevelopment proposals for the Livable Communities Demonstration Account and the Transit-Oriented Development Grant Programs through the Livable Communities Act. The appointments today include the at-large chair position, as well as openings in expert areas of community engagement, environment, development, local government, transportation, and site design. It's really an incredible slate of nominees with a variety of experiences and perspectives from from different sectors. And I really also want to particularly call out Mayor Mary Lee Abrams of Maplewood, who comes highly recommended from a number of you to be nominated to serve at the at-large position of chair. So we've been recruiting these openings through a number of community organizations, including many of you helping, as well as through our communication channels since April. And I want to give a special shout out to Councilmember Barber and Sterner for their help in recruiting Mayor Drosty to apply to the Land Use Advisory Committee. And also a big thanks to Member Bento, Chambliss, and Lee for serving on the LCAC nominating committee and hosting as many as 20 interviews over 2 evenings. So that was a large commitment of your time. And I know you say the staff makes it easy, and they do. It's still a lot of time and effort. I really appreciate your support for our advisory committees. So given that all that under the other business items with with my recommendations, unless anybody objects, I suggest we have one of motion to include all these appointments. And unless anybody has any questions or would like to split one of them out, and if not, I entertain a motion for approval.
Sterner moves the slate of appointments.
Thank you, Phil. Any a second?
Vento seconds.
Thank you, Sue. Any comments, questions, discussion? Councilmember Lee.
Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to give a shout out to staff, Katie Driscoll, who does this each year for all of us, and she does a great job. And whoever else supports her in this work, they do an incredible job keeping us on task and on time. And when before pandemic, they would even order us food for the late evenings. So thanks a lot to Katie Driscoll and her team.
I second that. Thank you, Chai. And also to add on to that, we lost some of that staff to help with the COVID in other areas like Katie did with the Department of Health. So we did all of it and other things as well. Any other discussion? Councilmember Johnson.
I just want to second everything that's been said. I was really pleased to see the slate that we have. I do want to shout out to Mayor Drosty. I got to serve with him in various capacities while I was mayor. He's a great candidate. So thanks for recruiting him because he'll serve us well. And everybody else on the other list, many people I know, I see their new names. So I'm thrilled. And to all of you who did put your time in, it's work, but it's really humbling, I think, when you go through a process like that to realize what great talent we have out there that want to help the whole region and provide their insights to us. So I just think it's a great slate and I'm really proud to support it.
Thanks, Judy. Any other thoughts? All right, Liz, please call the roll.
Atlas Ingebretson,
Aye.
Barber,
Aye.
Chambliss,
Aye.
Ferguson,
Aye.
Fredson,
Aye. Aye.
Gonzalez. Thank you. Gonzalez,
Aye.
Johnson,
Aye.
Lee,
Aye.
Lindstrom,
Aye.
Musse,
Aye.
Sterner,
Aye.
Vento,
Aye.
Wolf,
Aye.
Zurin,
Zaren's aye.
and Chair Zelli.
Aye. Aye. All right, that motion carried. We're getting really good at this after a year and a half. Now we're on to the information item, and I'm really thrilled that we're going to get some pretty interesting data. And those who kind of took a quick look would realize how important this is, not just for our own planning, but really for the whole region and governments and many sectors look to us, the Beck Council, for this presentation, for this update. So with that, we have our expert, Todd Graham, who is going to give the presentation. Todd, welcome, and take the reins.
And to find that unmute button. Thank you, Chair Zelli. Let me see if I can switch this to slideshow. Okay. I'm Todd Graham. I am a principal forecaster with Met Council Research. Is this slide showing up? The title slide?
We're seeing both the next slide and the title slide, so we're kind of seeing both. And you can try to set the presentation differently, but we are seeing it.
Okay. No, I'm gonna give it a try from here. Is this displaying on the screen?
It's kind of back to where we were with two slides.
Greg, I think I'm gonna have to take you up on that if I can't figure this out.
Yeah, that looks good.
Okay, Greg, have you taken over? Having some difficulty getting back to WebEx here. Okay. Yeah, I'm Todd Graham. I'm principal researcher with Met Council Research. I and our research team prepare and maintain the council's forecasts, the long-range economic and population forecasts for the region and for all the cities and towns in the region. Greg, you can advance one slide. Great. We are bringing you today a biennial update of the region level forecast and the trends that this work suggests. This is on screen as an outline of what I've prepared. I know there are always questions about why did the forecasts change. So that'll be where we'll end up the last quarter of the presentation. But jumping right in, Greg, you can advance a slide. I will start with the front matter, the forecast's connection to regional planning. Met Council is a planning agency. Any good plan is built on expectations about the future and about the conditions related to our planning and other activities. So our research team is called on to answer how much growth is expected and where and when will we see growth and changes. This work matters because, again, Met Council is a planning agency. In the Twin Cities, both Met Council and local governments are involved in systems, infrastructure provision, services delivery, and we have a concurrency expectation. That is, regional and local governments are planning for the same future. So this really is the path to planning success. In this presentation, I'm going to cover how much growth for the region and when we expect that growth. This presentation will not drill into where we expect the growth to happen. We are not yet revising all of the local forecasts. It is our practice to prepare a major update of local forecasts at least once per decade. And we last did that at the start of the decennial planning cycle and then when we released system statements. And we will do that again. This will be coming up in 2022. We are now working to implement and calibrate a separate local land use forecast model that we will be talking with you about next year. Next slide, please. So why are we bringing this update now? It is because we want to keep the information fresh. So we adopted a best practice of biennial updates. We update data on the national level economy, the context, assumptions, and just to keep it current and to keep in step with forecasts that everyone else is using. Specifically, we load into the council's regional model some time series that we get from IHS Markit's 30-year economic forecast and from the state economist's 5-year forecast. One more point here, the regional forecast in 2014 and 15 was the overall control for the local forecasts that went into the system statements. And what I mean by the local control, the regional forecast was the total of all the local forecasts. And it will be again as we get into the next planning cycle. More about local forecasts. You know that in between the comprehensive update of all the local forecasts, there can be individual one at a time forecast adjustments. And that happens when there's substantial change in local planning such that higher numbers or lower numbers are necessary. So ultimately you, the council proper, sign off on that. For example, earlier in today's council meeting, you acted to change the forecast for Burnsville, Minnesota, and for Champlin, Minnesota. So my advice is always read down to the forecast review section of those CD committee reports on comp plans. It'll give you some insight on whether local growth is as previously expected or it's going in a new direction. Greg, next slide, please. How we forecast. We use predictive analysis and models, including the regional model from Regional Economic Models Incorporated, an economics consultancy and vendor. This model uses a large set of equations and solutions for projecting forward macroeconomic accounts and outcomes. It also represents the region's situation within the national economic geography. So the model works to represent the regional economy as a system with moving parts and balances and dependencies, and that regional economy is part of the national economy. But the regional economy also, it can perform semi-independently. It has its own sectors of strength. It has its own characteristics, regional economic performance, distinguishing industries, a whole array of economic characteristics. The last thing to say on this slide, one more thing about our approach. It is an integrated modeling of the regional economy, employment, workforce, migration flows, and population. And this absolutely is a best practice. You may know many state governments still have separate agencies prepare their economic forecast versus their population forecast. And unless those have some coordination, there's a very real possibility of the economic forecast and the population forecast telling two different stories about two different futures. Greg, next slide. So moving ahead to the big reveal, here is the updated regional forecast. We forecast population will grow by about 800,000 people between now and 2050. You'll notice on this table, because the year 2020 was such a mess, I did insert a column, a time point for the current year, where we are right now. So we're going to look at a couple of these things one at a time, starting with employment. Greg, can you advance the slide? Historically, Twin Cities has had a great economy since the Minnesota Miracle of 50 years ago. Employment grew leaps and bounds in the 1970s and 80s and 90s, and then we get to the current century. So this chart that you see on screen, it may help to think of this long time series as 4 periods of time. During the decade that began in 2000, economic growth was just flat, unimpressive. And then the region did lose jobs during the Great Recession of 2008. It was, at that time, the biggest job loss we'd faced at that time. You'd have to go back to 1930 to find a previous decade that lost employment like that. The Twin Cities has recovered since 2010. During the Dayton and Walz administrations, we gained employment every year. We gained 230,000 jobs in the expansion from 2010 to 2019. Then we get to 2020. I shared some of this in our council research presentation to you about employment losses last year. The nationwide business closures and the COVID recession really left a very deep crater. You can see it in this time series. It left a deep crater in this employment time series. The Twin Cities region during that spring period of business closures lost very quickly 230,000 jobs. Now, for the good news, it's temporary. It's not as bad as this graph makes it look. In the latest employment stats from Minnesota DEED, we have regained over 80% of that lost 230,000 jobs. And many of our sectors of strength, I'm talking about industries with large national market shares, were less affected by COVID-19, less affected by social distancing than say the national average or other parts of the country. So now we're in 2021, the regional economy is growing again, and that will bring us into the next period. The period on the right side of this graph chart is the forecast, steady, modest economic expansion from now to 2050. I'd say one way to interpret these results, it is possible that the COVID recession caused a reset that could provide maybe new regional competitiveness advantages and differences. That's my really optimistic conjecture, and a topic needing more research. Okay, a reality check before we move on about the right-hand side of this chart, the future. The REMI model's solution equations really strongly presume equilibrium. This model by itself almost never predicts a recession. That is why we load into the model the IHS Markit national forecast, the same forecast used by the state economist. And we use that as our national context. But right now, IHS Markit, other economic consultancies and Wall Street banks and the state economist, none of those have explicit charted expectations of recessions going forward. So yeah, for right now, it looks like we have steady, aggressive, continuous employment growth all the way out to 2050. There probably will be recessions. I don't know when they'll be. Having said that, I trust a long-term number, the number at the far right side of the chart. I trust that we probably do get to almost 2.2 million jobs in 2050. We think that's about right. Greg, you can advance to the next slide. This is the population trend result. I'm not going to say too much about this, except that population ebbs and flows. We had historically high levels of new population in the 1990s. Then came the early 2000s with less growth. Then the decade that just ended, we have not seen 2020 census results yet, but we are projecting a gain of 333,000 residents in the decade just ended. Finally, the last three columns are forecasted levels. We expect population just continuously grows upward, but not as fast as the previous decades. I'm going to explain why in the next quarter of this presentation. Greg, you can advance the slide. I'd say the preview of this is that demographics are tough all over. The previous slide was about total population level. A great feature of forecasting with the model we use is that we have, it allows us to dig into some specifics. And these four bullets listed are the major trends and stories about our regional future. Migration trends, diversity, aging, all of these are going to upend activity patterns in the housing market and the job market. But the story I want to start with concerns population growth. and where it comes from. Greg, you can advance to the next slide. This chart pulls apart our population growth into natural growth and migration. The total height of each column that you see 6 columns on here, is the historic or forecasted population growth. And really, really great that in the decade just ended, we gained 333,000 people. But the growth is going to be decelerating in future decades. The top series of this chart, what's labeled natural growth, is the number of children being born less the number of people who die. Historically, throughout the 20th century, natural growth has been really the largest source of where the Twin Cities gets its new population. But that was then, and this is now, and you see there's sort of a shift going forward. We have passed the peak of what I was calling natural population growth. On one side of the balance sheet, birth rates are down. The number of births in Minnesota reached its peak in 2005, 6, and 7, and since then, birth rates have been declining. That doesn't fully explain the natural growth. The other side of the balance sheet is people dying. Those numbers will take off in coming decades, and the explanation is is baby boomers and Gen X and everyone who comes after. Because again, everyone will eventually die. I'll talk in an upcoming slide about the explosion of the senior population, and you can imagine subsequent to that, subsequent to the aging boom, there will also be a boom of people dropping out of the population. Okay, well, I want to turn to a happier subject, the bottom half of this chart. The dark blue time series is international immigration. Those numbers were down dramatically in years 2019 and 2020. Some of that was difficulties of the pandemic, but then also some of it was the anti-immigration policies, implemented policies, and barriers of the previous administration. Going forward, though, we're making some assumptions of a return to normal, a return to normal flows of international immigration. And our REMI consultants have found and have forecasted that the Twin Cities region's share of that international immigration is about 1% of everyone who immigrates to the United States. We get about 1%. Finally, this last light blue series on the chart. It's very thin numbers, but what it's showing you is domestic net migration. In Met Council's new report released on our website, we find the main reasons that people move domestically and that they relocate here from the rest of the U.S. are employment and economic opportunities and educational opportunities. That's why people move here. I know that this is the greatest region to live in. I think we may all have some bias in that. We've got lakes and parks and quality of life and a nice boring absence of out of control fires and hurricanes, things we don't have. But if we follow what this data is telling us, people do not move here to be close to the mountains or because Minneapolis is cool. Instead, our long-term correlation is a correlation between migration and the fortunes of the regional economy. I shared on the previous slide that the 1990s and the decade ending 2019, before the pandemic, were both decades of remarkable employment growth. And not at all coincidentally, those are also the decades when more people moved here from the rest of the nation. That 75,000 figure in the 1990s, and 42,000 domestic migration in the decade that just ended. There's nothing to say that these numbers need to be positive. In fact, all the numbers on this chart could be, they have the potential to go negative. But in fact, the only decade the Minneapolis-St. Paul metro really leaked population was that early 2000s decade, the same decade in which our employment and economic growth was flat, unimpressive, the region actually lost jobs during the 2008 through 2009 recession. So it's not coincidental that we lost domestic movers at that point in time. Next slide, please. Greg, still with us? Okay, in the interest of time, I'm going to say only little about the trends you're familiar with. The racial and ethnic diversification of the region is a steady long-term trend. Population of the Black population, Latino population, Asians, and other races are all growing. Meanwhile, the white population is expected to peak around 2030, does not grow more than that subsequently. Now, why these differences? Everything I described on the previous slide. The race groups listed have, that's a contributing factor. The incumbent white population tends to be significantly older in its age distribution and accounts for most of the losses that are upcoming from deaths. And then there's the migration. The people moving to the Twin Cities look a lot more like the rest of the nation and maybe the rest of the world. Let's continue. Next slide, please. Here we go. Aging of the population. Sooner or later, all of us, well, most of us, climb to that top series in the chart and find ourselves senior citizens, and we are rapidly gaining senior citizens. Again, the demographics are what's happening here. This is historically new because the baby boom generation, born in the 1940s, 50s, and early 60s, was the largest generation up to that point, and the first generation to really enjoy the longer life expectancies thanks to 20th century medicine and public health. You're seeing the ballooning of these top two time series because of the baby boomers, and then they're at retirement age now. They're aging into seniorhood and moving eventually into that 75 and over population series. So this is going to have big implications for activity patterns, transportation, consumer markets, the housing market. The one dynamic I want to focus on, though, is workforce supply. Greg, next slide. I discussed this time series earlier. We're forecasting the region will gain 442,000 jobs between now and 2050. Now, in economic statistics, a job only counts as a job if it's filled, if there's someone there doing that work. So how will the workforce supply expand to meet industry's needs, meet the demand? Greg, next slide, please. The good news is, Greg, this is an animated slide. Hit the animation once. Industries will find the next 442,000 jobs between now and 2050. It will be more complex and more varied than in the past. I want to start with the US-born workforce, these two time series on screen. Throughout most of the 20th century, this was the group that were a known quantity and therefore the traditionally imagined workforce source. Employers wanted US-born, working age, under 65 workers. But the growth of this demographic is now limited. It's growing slightly, but we only expect these series that are on the screen here to gain about 150,000 workers during the upcoming employment expansion. Greg, next, click once for the next point. Well, you've probably heard a lot of hand-wringing, maybe from the state capitol complex, about workforce shortages. There won't be enough workers in the future. That would only be true if the US-born population was all that we had to work. But that's not true. This region has been an immigration gateway in recent decades. Many of the immigrants who arrive here settle here permanently. They become part of the communities and become part of the economy. And their skills and participation are growing the workforce. So foreign-born workers, that would be the blue series on this chart. they're going to fill about 130,000 of the net new jobs. Older adult workers are another trend. I mentioned the aging of the population. Employers have maybe regarded this as a fringe phenomenon up to now. Employers will have to take it more seriously, though. Many seniors are delaying retirements. They're retiring later. They're choosing to participate more. Some of this may be out of their own economic need, their own economic goals, but it aligns with what the industries and employers need as well. So their numbers in the workforce, older workers, will grow by another 110,000. So these time series, these four together, comprise what we call the resident workforce. This is the head count of workers living in the 7 counties. Greg, can you click the chart one more time? There are additional adjustments on top of that. There are workers living in greater Minnesota and elsewhere that are attached to Twin Cities employers. They've been filling substantial numbers of jobs since the 1990s. And if there's growth in that workforce living outside the region, we forecast it's mainly going to be remote teleworkers. That's going to be the new avenue for boosting personnel. Greg, can you click the slide one more time? The final adjustments to show. Here we go. The final adjustments are there are 6 to 10% of workers who have a second job, so they contribute to workforce supply twice. And there are 3 to 10% of workers, the number really goes up and down with the economic cycle, closer to 10% last year, closer to 4% according to the state this year. It really varies over time who are the unemployed, but that unemployed, I'm showing it on the chart at the bottom of the chart as a negative debit on the workforce who are actively filling jobs. Next slide, please. So recapping previous 5 slides, demographics are tough all over, and all of these trends discussed are going to drive changes in activity patterns, transportation, housing demand, workforce development pipelines. The last bullet here, as a reminder myself, if you remember the presentation I gave on this 2 years ago, we usually present a households forecast series. That's not prepared yet today. We determined we really could not be confident in it until we have a household count from the 2020 census. Data from there has been slow coming. If you've seen any news coverage of it, Census Bureau is under federal court order to publish by August 16, and Census Bureau is saying they will publish all the population stats for everywhere on August 16. So we will see what's available a month from now, and then we will fill in that missing piece, the households forecast series. Greg, next slide. The last quarter of this presentation is about how and why our forecast changes, how it's changed since the Thrive 2040 plan's adoption. Generally on screen, these are the reasons that I told you 2 years ago. A forecast can change. I told you in 2019, it's all about what goes into the model as programming and assumptions and data inputs. And I know better now than I did then. I added a 4th bullet point here, which is that it's not all about what goes into the model. Year 2020 was really an object lesson that there are wild things that can happen outside of model space. And well, that's what I'm getting at with this last bullet point. The world itself can change. That itself is a pretty good reason for revisiting this. Greg, next slide. So I prepared this model, this slide about how we do forecasts, maybe as reassurance. In Met Council research team, we have been very deliberate and mindful about consistency in how we do this every other year. Really, most settings and assumptions in our workflow are the same now as they were in 2019. I've outlined on screen here eight of the major dynamics that are that have leverage to move the employment numbers or the population result. For the first 7 of those, we're really taking the same approach or using the same settings or assumptions. What we get from the model vendor may have changed a little bit, but how I'm working with that really has not changed. I could talk at length about any one of these, but I'm just going to skip to the last bullet on the slot, the last row on this table, and say that this last component is the only one that might look a little different from 2 years ago. In response to comments received when we last prepared the biennial update, we did look for and incorporate external projections of the exogenous bump that we expect as climate change incites people to leave other parts of the country, and where might they go instead. So Councilmember Chris is asking if we can ask questions. Yeah, let me finish the slide and then take questions. I don't want to drag this out. The number of domestic migrants destined for the Twin Cities is now assumed to be a little. It's projected to be a little bit higher than the last time we did this work. But the takeaway from this slide, we've been consistent in how we forecast. It's suggested that I pause for questions.
Go ahead. Thanks, Todd. This is a lot of data. And Chris, did you have a question?
I did. So I'm curious, you know, we're in sort of really 2 parts to the question, I guess. The first part is, we know historically that communities of color have not graduated at the same rate as our Caucasian communities. And so as our population demographics change, how does that impact our employees' availability, given that unless we fix that, if you apply the same trending, you would expect at least fewer high school graduates and college graduates out of the same population number to be available as employees. And then the second part of that question, which is similar, just as we sort of this, I mean, right now we say there's lots of people unemployed, we haven't recovered all the jobs, but employers are still struggling to find workers. So how do we sort of match those 2 up, where we, which is maybe part of the first question is the cause, but this sort of mismatch between who we have available as employees and what employers in our region are needing and looking, and how that might end up being less employment and more unemployment than the numbers might otherwise suggest. And how's that factored into the modeling?
Yes, to your first question, I've made simple assumptions about workforce development pipelines. We are making an assumption that the graduation rate gains that we've seen in the recent past continue, that there's an upward trajectory of graduation rates. You're right that it is somewhat swimming against a tide of the Latino population and the Black population having lower college going rates than the white population and Asian population. So that's a challenge, not just for Met Council, but really for every part of our state government that deals with workforce development, education, and employment. It's going to be a big challenge going forward in the future. The second part of your question was about how employers can mitigate mismatches that might be occurring right now. That's also a little bit outside of my expertise. There are probably people better at Met Council to answer the question about how Met Council, in its hiring and recruitment, deals with this, and how employers generally are dealing with it. I would just say that the new forecast is really an alarm call to get serious about what workforce availability looks like in the future. and engagement with workforce development pipelines. Historically, this has meant formal institutions of educational institutions, but there may be more needed. I think as the growing demographics, the growing parts of our population, people who are new to Minnesota, and this is generally the case with the Black, Latino, and Asian populations, is that there is a larger share of people who came here just in recent decades. They don't have social network ties going back generations. There does need to be greater inclusion in social networks and the linkage of those networks to employment and economic opportunities. Well, I don't want to get too far out ahead of my board here, so I'll take other questions, or we could also jump back to the presentation.
Well, let's
I see
field a few
hands.
questions first. Chris, did that answer your question? Just
It did. I mean, I think we have, we'll have to do some work just broadly as we forecast and use this
Yeah.
data. So, no, but it does. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Judy, you have a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Great question, Councilmember Ferguson, because I had that down as well. But to tag onto that, and then just one other quick thing. So obviously, this is available to everybody. That's why we produce it for the region. But clearly, it's important to get in the hands of Greater MSP, who is working on, has been working on for over a decade, attraction and retention, more so of professional employees, but they're looking across the workforce spectrum, right? So they've got the Make It MSP initiative that's going on. And so, really that's their, purview. I mean, everybody has to be engaged in it. We're all employers for sure. But I mean, this is really good, and hopefully we're syncing up with their data. And I'd also say the same thing for Center for Economic Inclusion, since they're our partners in our economic plan, and then of course everybody else. So I'm really glad to see this. Just two quick, well, and then let me just say this too, and again, just repeating what we know, but if this region is going to be serious about meeting our workforce needs and closing those educational gaps, we have to close disparities across the board, right? We don't want to be the worst in the country when it comes to disparities for Black, Indigenous, people of color. That's not good. And we're going in the wrong direction coming out of the pandemic, and real lives, of course, are being impacted. So hopefully the data is such that, for those that, hopefully it's always about the moral imperative, but for those that are looking for a bright economic future for all, this again is showing up some things that can be alarming. The last but not least, and not that it's this report's job, but this is always really interesting when we see our trends to then compare ourselves to our other regions who are peers and competitive regions to see, well, okay, this is how we're doing, so who cares? It does matter though, of course. But it really matters when we are trying to attract and retain employees, when we are trying to attract and retain businesses that may be new or expanding in the region. So all this matters, because I think there can be the argument that taxes in Minnesota are high, but when I worked at Greater MSP, maybe for some that was a deal, but that was not the deal. It was all about workforce, quality of life, all of the things that we're really known for. So I just want to put that out there. Hopefully, this really does get pushed into all the others that are working on these things that matter to our region. And then, somehow maybe Greater MSP will do that analysis, when it comes to the other regions that we're kind of competing against. And that's not just nationally, but globally. I'll be interested to see what they do, with this next iteration of information. And by the way, I think this is an awesome report. So well done. And really appreciate your methodology too.
Thank you, Councilmember Johnson. Chair Zelle, I'll respond quickly by saying I agree with most all of those points. And CD Division Director Barajas reminds me by chat that we are regularly in touch with Greater MSP, particularly in our work together on the regional economic framework. A comparison of it's very possible to do, and Greater MSP does prepare a comparison of our recent economic performance against peer regions, and in some respects we compare well. I have a suspicion that all sorts of balances and previous advantages are going to be tossed up in the air as a result of the recession we've just come out of. And it'll be interesting to see if that's to our advantage. It might be. I'll also say that I and the whole forecast team at Met Council are in touch with our peer agencies that do forecasting at a number of other major metros. And you know, I suppose I could ask them what their forecasts for 2050 look like, but the answer might be everyone's optimistic. I will say that one of the things that we do in the model that I've been discussing and presenting results to you is we do look at our region in comparison with the balance of Minnesota and also the rest of the nation. We're able to calculate our share of the national economy, and it is a growing market share going forward into the future. We have about 1.2% of the nation's economy today, and our forecast is that eventually that's 1.3% of the nation's economy, which sounds like small numbers, but it's as a practical matter billions of dollars. I know that there were two other council members waiting.
I know, Linnea, you've had your hand up.
Thanks, Chair. So just a couple of thoughts. One is, for me, you know, this is really great information to see, and it's really powerful. These are the kinds of reports and resources that people will use, hopefully beyond just our team, as they're looking at what's happening in the region. And with that in mind, I think about a couple of thoughts. One is, and I understand why it's the case, but the absence of Indigenous people when we disaggregate data, I understand why it's not there, but I think that we also have the opportunity by producing this data to lead by example and to innovate in how we share information. And so that's one thing that I think is important, especially because it's such an important population here in the state of Minnesota, and it's an important population everywhere, but I really think that that's important for us not to list BIPOC, but not to include Indigenous people in the data that we're actually looking at. The other thing that I would say that's just, I'm thinking about how, again, do we share information and lead by example when we have resources that visualize disparities, and then when we present information and have it and that not be disaggregated. I'm thinking about in particular something that's so critical to the disparities that exist here, like employment. And that would be great to see as an addition to this is that employment data on that, I think it was the first slide maybe even, or early on, disaggregated by race and ethnicity. My great wonderment is we know at one point during the pandemic crisis of the last year and a half that African-American households, 50% lost jobs due to COVID. That is our, you know, a large population. And because we have these persistent disparities, if we aren't sounding the alarm that there's not been a concerted plan organized around addressing that, then we're missing, we can see an overall positive trend, but we can see these populations who we are dependent on their growth in the very near future and their success and integration. We're not looking at the canaries in the gold mine now when we have the opportunity to, and then it will be too late. And also from previous downturns like the Great Recession of 2008, it's kind of hard to see that in language and not be thinking about the 1930s, which is, you know, my great-grandparents really talked a lot about that and the implications of that on them, but we've gone through our own Great Recession. People of color did not recover. They didn't even get a
Yeah.
chance to recover from that. And then the pandemic hit. And so I just think that that's a really, if we could augment this presentation, like I said, it's a resource for our community to use to include some of those data points. I would really appreciate that and think that would be deeply helpful. My last thing is just when we talk about our institutions and our students' abilities to be persistent in them, we have to remember that our institutions are successful with certain populations and not others. So I like to think about it that, you know, we do a great job of educating certain students. We don't do a great job of educating others. That's where we have growth to happen. And when we think about higher education, that is even more critical because the tradition of higher education has been seed and weed, and that the merit is in your ability to overcome the barriers, not the goal to have a workforce. That's, you know, the tradition of education is who can make it through. We are seeing that when you look at the persistence rates for anyone, regardless of race or ethnicity in higher education, it's not good. For any, we're not talking about the majority of students graduating. It's the antithesis of that, right? And so there's a piece in there too, where it's really about how are our institutions doing to ensure students are successful, whether it's in K-12 systems or in higher education. And that's what we get to benefit from. Last piece is Minneapolis Civil Rights Department. I've said this before, a Black man with a college degree less likely to be employed than a white man with a felony. We still have work to do. That's not about uneducated populations not being right for jobs. That's about maybe, Todd, some of the things you were talking about around social networks, but also our abilities to really address what are the interpersonal reasons that create and sustain institutions that cannot allow everyone, regardless of race, culture, gender identity, to succeed.
Great comments. Thank you.
Atlas Ingerbretson and Chair Zelli, I can only agree with most of what you've said. To your point about the race and ethnicity drill down in the forecasts, with most government statistics or census data that our research team is bringing to you, we are making an effort to find and present a more detailed dive into specific demographic groups. So you see that when we bring socioeconomic data that's current or recent history. Forecasts are a little bit more difficult because we are using this forecast model from a vendor, Regional Economic Models Incorporated. There's a substantial amount of the model operation that is closed programming. It's not programming that I'm able to change. There are some settings in the model I can change, but the vendor itself has defined what they thought were the 4 largest race groups in the nation. I think I would be willing to give a try at doing some post model drill down, taking what comes out of the model and piecing out the indigenous population numbers from that. I can tell you in advance that the indigenous population is going to be the smallest slice of the population pie chart. But it's still possible to do it.
Just a follow-up question. Go ahead.
Chair, if I could, thank you. I think just like how we work with transit folks to create innovations and partnership, maybe this is an opportunity for us to help some of these agencies build models that better serve communities like ours, and then perhaps others. And so maybe that's an opportunity where we could reach out and ask for partnership. I also think even for the recent there's the forecasting part of it looking forward, but there's also like this last year, 2021, 2020 and 2021, I'm guessing maybe we're able to talk about what actually happened, but that's just a thought.
Yes.
I think we have to be able to innovate and change these systems. And I appreciate you sharing that And maybe that would be something that would be a gift we could help give the broader nation and community.
Yes.
All right, great comments. I know we have Peter, Abdi, and Sue. So Peter, go ahead.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Just a quick anecdote from the rest of my council colleagues. Last week, I was presenting to the Roseville Kiwanis Club, and I mentioned the 800,000 number population increase by 2050. And after my comments, a guy came up to me, Roger Williams, who was a Met Council member about 20 or 25 years ago. And he said, hey, I just want to talk to you about those population increases. When I was on the council, the research team estimated a population increase by 2010 of between 200 and 400,000 people. And he said, I looked back and it was 300,000. So the research team was right on the money. I totally expected him to say something other than that, but it was great to hear. So I listened intently, and Todd, I have a feeling you're going to be more often right than wrong on a lot of these numbers. I do have a question on the climate, the climate change induced migration, the
Okay.
Hauer projections. Do you have more specifics on those numbers? And if you don't, that's okay. Or if you could get them to me later, that would be just interesting for me and the council.
I'll try to keep it brief. Matt Hauer is a socioeconomic researcher at Florida State University. He had a projection set that was published in the journal Nature of domestic displacements due to sea level rise. I will say that looking at the literature as it exists now, it's really hard to forecast how climate change is going to affect things and move people. But sea level rise is a little bit more unambiguous. If the sea level is rising, it's and you know how much, you can map out what areas will be affected. So Matt Hauer has and others have projected that 13 million people will be dislocated in this country between now and 2100. Well, that's 80 years from now. Florida alone is 1/4 of that. The other thing that Hauer finds in his study is that based on historical migration movement, which is what he's taking as his template for how people prefer different regions, he's concluding that people really don't want to move more than a few hundred miles. So the numbers coming to MSP region amount to less than 18,000 people, which is, tiny. It's just the tiniest share of 13 million. There will be far more migration. He and his collaborators are projecting to places like Austin, Texas, and Atlanta, Georgia, places that are higher up from sea level, but that there will be these dislocations, and I thought it was worth looking into since it had been asked by a number of people when we did this work 2 years from now.
Interesting. We will certainly get some snowbirds back when there's no Florida and no snow. No, seriously. Peter, one more.
Just a quick follow-up. There was a New York Times article from maybe a year and a half ago that the headline is "Want to Escape Global Warming? These cities promise cool relief." And the first city they talk about, you remember it, don't you, Todd? Duluth.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Abdi, did you have a question?
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Todd, for pointing out the lack of professional network as a barrier to opportunity for workers of color. And that's really a major one. I know that from experience. Every week or every, in a database, I see overqualified candidates with PhDs, double masters who have been applying jobs and going nowhere because they don't have any professional network or someone they can call or text. It's a really big barrier. And to the level right now, I stopped sending or referring anyone I know to apply public sector because with so many disappointments that folks are getting just to get, even to get an interview, let alone getting the job. Do you have any idea how to navigate that barrier or how to at least minimize this, obstacle and to create some opportunities for folks who are highly qualified but have a social network and professional deficit?
I'm going to defer on this. I'd say that it's outside of my professional expertise. I do socioeconomic numbers, but not workforce development per se. I think it is a topic for the council and its departments to explore as we get into the next regional planning cycle.
But it's also workforce related because if the work related folks cannot get into the jobs, it's a barrier that it's also workforce related.
Yes. Yeah, it is one of the factors that would be leading people to be underemployed, both in terms of the rewards of the jobs they're able to find, and underemployed in terms of simply able to get a job with the hours that are desired. So that's definitely something that all government institutions involved in workforce development should be attentive to.
Sue, and then Rifa, you have a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Todd, I just wanted to thank you and applaud you for the emphasis you gave on the aging data. And I wanted to note for our council members that the legislature, with great support from the governor's office, did a great job of moving forward with the efforts to establish an age-friendly Minnesota community, a series of communities here in Minnesota. And if any of you have any questions or would like more information or know of communities that are interested in becoming involved with the age-friendly network under AARP's leadership, I'd be happy to help facilitate that. It's a great program. And now more than ever, given what we have learned in the last couple of years with COVID and with community unrest, the needs of our seniors and the roles of our seniors in our community are critical. And not all of us are ready to be shelved yet. So thank you.
Comforting to know there's a lot of us boomers out there, Sue. Thanks. Rifa, do you have a question?
This information is so interesting. We could probably have a session just to respond to the presentation because there's a lot to unpack there. The changing demographics, looking what is happening now, as Councilmember Vento said, with seniors and what their needs are, to what's going to happen, 10 years from now with those 75 and beyond, and as well as the changing birth rates, the smaller family sizes, and what that's going to do to the graph. It looks like it's going to compress it quite a bit in a very short period of time. So how does that impact our forecasting? I'd like to see what the forecasts are for that. And you bringing up the inclusion aspects and that the newly arrived Blacks in the state of Minnesota, how to get them included, and noting the historically lacking social networks. That is crucial. That impacts the level of engagement, the level of information as we are investing and building transit-oriented development, community development, and also impacts the level of connectivity amongst themselves. There were things that happened in the past, some good, some not so good in terms of redlining, segregation, but there was a level of connectivity that was there that is not so much in the suburban areas where a lot of people of color are residing. So looking at what does that do as far as the level of engagement that we're trying to get amongst the different communities. I've been looking at that really closely, so it's really funny that you brought that up, and I'd like to get more detail on that, Todd, if you can provide that. And then what Councilmember Atlas Ingebrigtsen said about being innovative with the data is really important in terms of inclusiveness for Native Americans, or with the changes in the migration or the demographics, and they may not fit some of our traditional models for gathering data. So I think that innovative piece of it is very important. So thank you so much on all of those. I look forward to hearing more on the information that you received and found about the social networking.
Yes, Councilmember Chambliss and Chair Zelli, you bring up a couple of things. Demographic factors like birth rates, migration rates. We have distilled something like 9 worksheets of data into an Excel workbook that is now published on the Met Council website, and it's all of the major results coming out of this forecast modeling, including birth rates and the number of births and deaths that are expected, age of the mother, life expectancy. Really more than I'm going to present to you today, but it is on our website and downloadable to anyone who wants to look. The other part of your comment, the question about where I get my information on the connection of social network importance to economic prospects. We have a research team that is a really great mix of quantitative people like myself, but also some qualitative research people who have been working on equity and inclusion issues in communities around the region. We have some of these qualitative researchers specifically assigned to our parks systems efforts, and I've learned a lot from them about the way that the issues are perceived in communities around the region. So it's not so much quantitative data that I have as it is a lot of notes that we've taken about social connections and their significance.
Todd, this is really great stuff. I know you have a few more slides. Did you want to, and I hate to, I know we've really gotten into it, and you can realize you've piqued a lot of our interest in knowing, as Councilmember Chambliss said, nothing that we can totally unpack in one meeting, but to the extent that this is going to continue to inform a lot of our work and thinking is really key. Did you want to run through those extra slides now? Or
Well,
okay.
Let's do a speed version of
Sure.
that. And if hopefully Greg is still with us, we can pick up at looks like slide 17 or so. Yeah, let's advance to the next slide. I was going to get into how are the forecasts we prepared different from what we brought you 2 years ago, 4 years ago, 6 years ago. And on screen, the middle of this chart shows our forecast update side by side, the last couple of iterations of it. The one, Greg, can you click the slide? I think there's some call outs in this. Yeah, the 2040 results, not a lot of difference in what the model has been perceiving as future employment. It's always been around 500,000 jobs growth. Greg, can you click again? The one number that really did change a lot this cycle, and this is not a forecast. This is replacing the forecast with an actual count of jobs, is that year 2020 employment number. And of course, you already know what happened there. Next slide, please. The population update has a little bit more wiggliness to it. With each biennial update, I've been telling you to expect growth of 800 to 900,000 people, somewhere in there. And the numbers have wiggled a little bit. This latest update is a little bit higher. A small fraction of that is due to the trajectory of employment the trajectory of birth rates leveling off, according to our model vendor. We'll see if that's the case. A fraction of the gain to the latest forecast also has to do with more international immigration, more domestic migration. And then finally, Greg, can you click the slide once or twice? One more time. Finally, the biggest, no, go back one. Yeah, the biggest reason that the 2040 forecast is higher is that the 2020 numbers have just kept edging up every time we do an update. And that is a function of just continuing to overperform on migration to the region. So we ended up closing out the decade, and this is, I guess you could call this is population growth that's already booked. It's already happened. We think that we're at 3.18 million people, and that is 55,000 more people than we expected at the time that we did the system statement forecast. Okay, next slide. So just to recap this little section, the world we live in has changed. We've learned that in the hardest way possible. Much of what happened this year and last year has been terrible. The pandemic is still going on. In fact, the pandemic is eating into those death statistics that I talked about. But on the other hand, I want to try to be optimistic here at the end. Many of our sectors of strength, industries with good national competitiveness, many of those were less affected by COVID-19 and social distancing responses. And I was talking the other night with guys who are managers at Land O'Lakes, and they say that their company and every other food attached company or large retail chain in the region are just having the greatest year. So some industries actually came out okay of this large economic disruption. It all depends on who we're talking about. All of the investors, site selectors, decision makers who size up regional economies, and this is going back to Councilmember Johnson's point, are going to assess the Twin Cities economy looking, we think, fundamentally sound still. And that's even taking into account the 2020 civil disturbances and the institutional crisis that we still have with policing. Still, the Twin Cities economy looks pretty good compared to most places. The model that I've been describing is one particular lens for looking at these kind of things. It's a quantitative and analytic tool with a certain framework for assessing what is the regional competitiveness of the region that's being analyzed. And the employment results for 2030 and 2040 are just a tad higher in this model run, this forecast result, than they were 2 years ago. That 2% bump is, I don't want to say anything conclusive about it. I'm going to say it's interesting. It's a sign that the model sees our regional economy as just as strong. And I'm going to say this is my conjecture. Economists will be looking at how the COVID recession caused a reset in regional economies all over the country. Things have been shaken up that could provide new competitiveness advantages. It could provide new differences. We will see. Greg, advance to the next slide. We're in the home stretch now. I think I've just got 3 slides left. This is to let you know that we have published today a regional forecast highlights report, an update of the methodology paper, and an Excel workbook with 9 worksheets of employment, economic, and demographic characteristics of the future region. Next slide, please. And then finally, I wanted to wrap up with a preview of information we'll be bringing you in 2022. The last complete update of local forecasts was in 2015 at the time that system statements were authorized. The next complete update of all the local forecasts and extending the time horizon to 2050 is going to happen starting next year. We are at this point completing, we are working on the implementation, calibration and tuning of a local forecast model that takes the 800,000 population growth number and locates it to specific places in the region, specific communities, specific zones. So that's something we are working on. We expect to have it running and ready in 2022, and that will then precipitate what are always very interesting discussions about local expectations of the future and each community's share of local growth. Greg, next slide, please. And yes, this is I think what I just covered. That right now I'm providing you with the regional forecast of population and jobs. Later this year, we're hoping to have the households forecast plotted out. In August, we are going to receive the first local census data from 2020 census. Sometime in 2022, they have been cagey about their timeline. We will get more demographic characteristics tables from 2020 census. But you know, again, as recently as yesterday, asking census executives about their timeline, they have said, we're not ready to say when the next batch of tables will be out. We're only saying that we're going to comply with the federal court order to get the first batch of stuff out. Okay. In 2022, we will have a local model that is refreshed and also calibrated and ready for use. The text on this slide that's highlighted in red are some things that I would say are new in this next forecast cycle and planning cycle. It will be new that we are working to have a local forecast model that will allow us to demonstrate alternative regional policy scenarios. And that will be a subject of discussion in 2022. Looking farther around the bend of our forecast cycle, we expect to have forecasts that the council can approve and invest in the next regional plan in 2023. I expect, I do need to confirm this, that we would again have system statements issuance in 2025. I'm not sure that there's an incentive to Met Council to do it earlier than that. But in the discussion and negotiation of local forecasts, we will hopefully be bringing communities greater detail in the forecasts, greater detail both spatially within their community and also the demographic characteristics that we've been talking about. And that is not something you would have seen in the 1996 forecast for the year 2020, which the council member is quite correct that 1996 issued forecast was right on the money for both population and employment. But we're going to have what we are going to have in this planning cycle is more details that we can bring to those discussions. That concludes the. Yep, if you can advance to the next slide, I think we're at the end. Yes, we are at the end. That concludes my prepared material. I'm available for questions as long as you guys want to ask.
This is really great work. Thank you. And clearly you, as I mentioned, have struck us all with great curiosity. Any additional questions for Todd at this point? Well, and I think Councilmember Chamba said it best. This is more than we can just process and digest in one sitting, but we would look forward to having you back and also thinking about this report as we both in our own work, but as we collaborate with the Center for Economic Inclusion, as Councilmember Johnson said, as we work with Greater MSP. I just met with some of them last week, and clearly site selectors are really looking, and there's some positive stories, but they're assuming a workforce pipeline, which in the disparities that we have got to be part of the solution. So, you know, this really calls that we have our work cut out for us in so many different ways. But so I thank you, Todd, and I also want to appreciate everybody with some really great questions and kind of staying focused on this. We just have a time for just a few reports. I have no reports other than to say I went to was that last week? I was at a Minneapolis Chamber in-person breakfast. I haven't done that for a couple of years, and it was great to see legislators. Councilmember Ferguson was there, and we actually had some really crummy chamber eggs and bacon. So you know, how about that? I'm not sure if that was the bubble that we're gonna not have or we're gonna have more of, but we certainly are tracking the Delta variant and thinking about how that affects our council work and both our business, our transit, our meetings, but you know, and the downtowns that we care and all their kind of activity we care about. So you know, stay tuned. Does any other council members have anything they'd like to share? Any reports? All right, hearing none. Mary, you're right there. Do you have anything?
I do, Mr. Chair. Just kind of a highlight of our upcoming agendas in August. We've got some pretty important things on the agenda. First, August 4th, the Committee of the Whole, the Citizens League will be there to preview their observations. Their final report is due August 31st, but they'll be doing a presentation for us on the 4th, and that will really help inform the additional work that we're going to do for police review. Remember, we're going to try to come to the council once a month through the end of the year with different topics on police review. And then on August 11th, we do our gruelingly long presentation of the preliminary budget and levies. And then August 21st, or 25th, we'll ask you to adopt the preliminary budget and levy. And after that date, our levy can go down, but it cannot go up. And
right.
One more quick thing. Since we mentioned before, people being off helping the state with COVID, just wrapping up all of our staff who have been over at MDH helping out. We spent over 8,700 hours, including Meredith and then staff from communications, IS, HR, in helping out the state with their response to COVID. And so just a tremendous, amazing body of work that we were able to help out with.
Thank you for doing the work and for also tracking it. That's really an impressive figure.
Yes.
Thanks, Mary. And I see General Counsel Ann, you're here.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No report.
No reports. Okay. Well, this was a meeting with lots of substance, as we so often have. So great meeting. Have a great afternoon. Stay cool. And I think we're done, but we're looking forward to next week. That Committee of the Whole meeting will be really interesting. All righty. We're adjourned. Goodbye, everyone. Thanks.